heartily welcome you to Kozhikode, and you can see how.
Thank you. Thank you, KLF. What a setting.
So, I want to ask you first by talking about, we've been here and about your book that you wrote. It's almost 15 years since you wrote Poor Economics. And you said now you have come up with a second edition, a revised version. So could you please start by telling us why the second version are you looking at in 15 years? So much has changed. So what have you got right? What have you gotten wrong? So what can we expect from the second edition?
The second edition is all about what we got right, what we got wrong. So if I started telling you that, that'll take a couple of hours. So I'll say, but I think it's very important to say that as a social scientist, you're always saying something, you're interpreting what the current evidence says. That's not to say that what you're saying is the truth. It's just what the current evidence says. Then you wait for new evidence to come in. And when new evidence comes in, sometimes you say, oh, that's really, we got it straight backwards. Sometimes it comes in and you say, now I think I understand something better. Sometimes you pat yourself on the back and say, now we got that right. But that process is one that I think is sort of built into the nature of our knowledge, that we get things right, we get things wrong, and we don't discuss enough the fact that, we used to think this, and now we think this. And we thought in writing the book that that's useful, to insist on the fact that even competent social scientists, even people who are using evidence carefully, get things wrong.
We all consider economics as a very complex subject, but what Abhijit has done through his work is to break it down. And, one very, very important concept that you emphasized in your book, throughout the book, is that we always talk about poverty, but we don't talk about poor people. We don't try to understand them, their choices. So on that ground, I want to ask you, if you could just explain it for me and for the audience. We tend to kind of believe that inequality and poverty are maybe the same thing, or we use it thinking that, that this explains the same concept. So could you please explain, as an economist, what is the difference between inequality and poverty?
So I think that there's no particular, I think that clearly one consequence of inequality is often poverty, so they're obviously related. But at some level, when I say that, there is a large box of mithai, but I give one of my children 5 and the other children 10, then that's inequality. Neither of them is poor as a result. Poverty is about not being able to reach some acceptable, some humanly reasonable standard of living. Inequality is a lot about the top. It's about, why did X have, why could X spend, I think some estimates say, I won't name X, but you can guess, $600 million in his son's wedding. How could, when $600 million would be, a whole bunch of people's, a million people's annual income. So, how could it be that one person gets to spend that much? So inequality is a lot about the people at the top, and poverty is a lot about the people at the bottom.
You spoke about global inequality is at a historic high. We haven't seen this level of inequality. I know it's a broad, sweeping question, but if you could break it down to maybe one or two, the most important factors why this inequality is widening globally, how would you do that for me?
So just to emphasize the fact first, we don't have data for the 17th century, and maybe in the 17th century there was even more inequality. But since we have data, we are at a global peak. And and there I want to be careful. Uh, there are two kinds of inequality. One is inequality within countries, and the other is inequality across the world. Inequality across the world, every country can become more unequal, and inequality across the world might go down. So, and partly that's exactly what's happening. So, most countries are getting more unequal. There are some exceptions, but on the other hand, inequality across the world is a lot about the comparison of the average Indian with the average American. And since India is growing faster than America, that difference can be shrinking, but mostly this is to do with China. The average Chinese is getting richer, and as a result, global inequality has been going down for some time, even though within country inequality, within China, within India, within the US has been exploding. So each country is getting more unequal. Now, in-country inequality matters because, the rich then acquire sort of exorbitant privileges, basically. They get so much power that they can do whatever they want. And so we should start worrying about the fact, not just that the whole world is, the whole world is becoming maybe less unequal because India's catching up a bit with the richer world, but but on the other, India along that way is becoming more and more unequal, and we should be worrying about that fact. Now, why is it happening? Well, there are two parts to it. One part of it, which is what you see when you really talk about the super rich, about Zuckerberg or Sergey Brin or these owners of Google and Facebook and Microsoft, and this is because the global markets are enormous, and products that reach the global market become enormously valuable. In fact, the US stock market is almost entirely dominated by 7 companies, 6 of which are these globally used softwares of different kinds. So maybe 5 of the 7 are, and that's not an accident. That's because once I use a particular piece of software, it becomes easier for all my friends to use the same thing. So we all build on each other, and as a result, I use WhatsApp, so therefore all my friends use WhatsApp. And that's why Zuckerberg is so rich. So that's one thing that's going on. The second thing that's going on is that at some level, how much the CEO gets paid, what's fair, is something that is a social judgment. When Elon Musk decided to award himself $54 billion as his salary, there was a $54 billion salary. I think it's even, it's worth digesting that fact. People in his company thought, my God, what have you done for the company? But he basically bullied people into giving him that salary. So it's a matter of a bit about how shameless people are, and there are a lot of shameless people in the world.
Since you spoke about these big corporates, Meta and Google, and these global CEOs who earn, as you said, billions as salaries, but in India, that IT revolution or software revolution we saw, a whole section of middle class IT engineers, their salaries shooting up, and people who are earning 30,000 or 40,000, the IT salaries began at 1 lakh or 2 lakhs. So that kind of disparity was there. But you were telling me that though India is one of the fastest growing economies, our inequality, we have on data, it shows that it hasn't increased. But even if you look at just the software industry, the salaries haven't gone up much in the last 5 years. So how does that impact, that
So what's
graph?
happening is, and I think this is related to AI, is that, a lot of software companies are not hiring. And then there in India, you hear IBM is not hiring, Infosys is not hiring, and that's not accidental. It's because a lot of the jobs that people used to do, AI can do, and therefore software jobs are just not going to be growing as fast as we expect. And all, simple animation is something that, people used to do, now AI is going to do. So there's a whole bunch of what were good jobs, seen as good jobs in India, will not be there. Now, instead, there are these, these global centers which are being set up, and so some amount of maybe more high-end work is happening, but it's hard to imagine that those are going to substitute perfectly. So I feel like there's a bunch of people with kind of good skills, but not top skills, who are going to be displaced. And that's partly what's happening, is that the comfortably off upper middle classes are actually not doing well. So one of the things you see in the data is that the upper middle classes are getting not growing as fast as the average person, which is why if you look at the government of India, for example, says that inequality is going down. Now, inequality isn't going down. If you go to any mall in India where you see Zara and how many people are buying, it's hard to imagine that inequality is going down. What's happening is that the people who are not in the data, who are never show up in the data, so how do you get data? You get data by going to somebody's house, asking them, will you answer a survey? If you go to a gated community in Kozhikode or in Gurgaon or in Kolkata, you'll be sent away. So the very rich never enter surveys. So we have no data on the very rich. So what's happening is that within the group of people for whom we have data, inequality is falling. The GDP is growing, and is growing faster than the income of the average person. What's happening to the rest of the GDP is going to the very rich. The ultra rich are getting even richer, but there's no data on those people, so we have no idea how rich they are.
Abhijit, I want to ask you, since you spoke about how you cannot access certain gated communities, and that is why data is not available. Since with all this technology that we have, do you think, can't we address that problem? Because this whole data collection process can be turned into a digital process.
It's not a question of digital or not. It's a question of getting people to respond. So, I mean, partly, people are they're reasonable to say, look, it's a waste of my time. Why should I answer a survey? So answering a survey, poor people are very kind and generous with their time. They answer all the surveys. Poor rich people don't. So therefore, when you look at the data, it's not a matter of technology. It's a matter of thinking of other ways of collecting the data. You should look at how many people buy houses worth 5 crores. If you're buying a house worth 5 crores, you're probably not making 50,000 a month. So I think we can. There are ways of getting at it. We should look at real estate prices in all the cities. Look how many houses get bought at 5 crores, 3 crores, 20 crores, etc. And sort of use that to back out just how many people must be making a whole bunch of money.
Yeah. I'm sure a lot of people here all of you might have at least heard this once in your life when they say, we need inequality. Because we are anyway born unequal. All our physical attributes, everything is different and unequal in many ways. So inequality is in a way good, because that is an incentive for people, who are in the lower strata to work better and, climb up. Is that a myth, and what have you discovered through your research and through your years of academic rigor?
So, I think that to the extent that people can look at this, when they look at the effect of tax changes on people's actual earnings, what happens when taxes go down is people often will say, okay, well, now I'm going to pay more taxes. And so tax payment goes up. But actual earnings don't change. So we don't see any evidence that, once you cut the taxes, people start working harder and making more money. There's lots of studies of that in various contexts, from In the studies in California, in Switzerland, in Sweden, there's lots of studies of that. There's no evidence that people, say, okay, now that the taxes are lower, I'm going to work harder. What they say is, okay, now that the taxes are lower, I won't cheat on my taxes, mostly.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying on that. And for all of us, when we hear the term inequality, it's a very abstract term. But I want to look at inequality from a child's perspective. The moment a child is born, depending on where he is and who he is born to, what kind of social structure, the inequality for that child starts from that point, his birth, which hospital, what kind of maternal care his mom can get, and which directly impacts his health. And the child grows up through that spectrum of inequality. Is it possible to reverse that at some point? And what are the factors, or what is the most important factor that would help reverse it? Is it education?
So I think that in principle, the idea very much is that education is the one thing that we offer democratically. Everybody participates, and that most talented rise to the top. If you reflect, however, on the lives of a 15-year-old in India, you see that who his parents are determines how many tutors are pestering him to to learn this last calculation, which is going to be important in the exam, and the how many other online courses are being lined up for him, and how many things his parents are doing to make sure that he's going to actually be successful. It's a huge, and it turns into another machine for manufacturing inequality. Rich parents can invest much more in their child's education than poor parents. So countries which tend to have democratic education systems, which is, I think, what we don't have in India, have high social mobility, and countries that don't. And the US is somewhere in between, because the US has decent public schooling, but where you live matters a lot, because your school is funded by your community. So if you're a rich community, you have big houses, you get better schools than you live in a poor community. And as a result, once again, social mobility in the US is roughly half of that in continental Europe.
Yeah, I think if you consider that in an Indian context, uh, rich people go to these elite private schools, and parents who cannot afford it, we send them to government schools, and our public school education system is not anywhere near the quality that we would need. But again, when policymakers look at how to address inequality, I hear them always talk about uh, the question of access to education, have free education, subsidized education. And I think in India especially, we see this very strange phenomena where there are more kids going to school, but they still can't read or write. And there are graduates, but they still cannot, construct an entire paragraph in English, though they studied English literature, but so on and on. So where is that policy on access to education or quality of education is faltering?
So I think that this is one of the things that we wrote extensively about in this revised edition of Poor Economics, because the last 15 years we've been kind of digging into it. So I'll tell you one fact that's really really striking there. So we did a study where we first went to markets in Kolkata and Delhi, and we asked kids who were selling vegetables. We sent actually buyers, so real buyers with real money, to say, okay, I need 300 grams of carrots and 200 grams of peas. They get those. They give 200 rupees, they get change back. Spot on. The kids can all do the mental math. Same kids, so the same 12-year-old kids, we then go and ask them, we write down a very simple problem, like 62 minus 27, and show it to them. And they say, if I could do that, I would be in school. So they really are. So what's happening in the education system is we are, instead of telling a child, look, you figure out the way to do this problem, you have your own intuitions, do it. We intimidate children. We throw a curriculum at them and say, this is the right method. If you don't do the right method, then in my school, they used to punish us for doing it with the wrong method. So it's not, it's an old idea. So, there's a truth, and you have to kind of, the teacher has the truth, he will give it to you. And because these kids are the ones who didn't understand that teacher's truth, they fail. It's not because they lack mathematical intuition. We did another study where we took children before school, and there are ways of measuring preschool mathematical capabilities. Like, can you classify big clusters and small clusters? And we compared the performance of children in Delhi slums with the children in the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is where MIT and Harvard is. So all the children of the PhD students and professors. And they do exactly as well. Our children at age 4 are just as good at math as the children of the MIT professors. But somehow we don't manage to take advantage of that. Our school systems are built on this idea that you have to learn algorithms, that this is the right way to do it, you have to learn the right ways of doing it. And that's a disastrous way of thinking of mathematics. Mathematics is finally about how to conceptualize things in your mind, and algorithms are just kind of, if you don't have another way of doing it, do it this way. Instead, we prioritize the official knowledge and not people's intuitions.
We talk about education, healthcare, all of that as factors, when we think about inequality. But there's one very important thing which a lot of us don't address is power, and how power drives inequality. And that power is also very closely linked to money. Like if I have money and if I have power, even when it comes to a criminal justice system, I get a better treatment, I can hire a better lawyer. So how have you understood power driving inequality? And could you just throw some light on that?
Let me start with a small story. It's written up in, I have a book called Chalk, where this story is there. When I was at JNU, we were taken to Tihar for misbehaving or whatever. The government said we were misbehaving. When we got to Tihar jail, which is, supposed to be a very scary place, we were, first day we got, lunch. Lunch was dal chawal. And one of our students looked up something and said, no, since we have bachelor's degrees, we are master's students, we are entitled to vegetables. So you can get bhindi if you have a master's student, but not if you are not. In the Indian Penal Code, which now might have finally been changed, but even even 40 years ago, even 15 years ago, it was the way you get treated in the legal system for the same offense depended on who you are. Are you a master's student? Are you a bachelor student? Are you a high school student? Do you have no education? And that's pervasive. There's especially people who are, the ultimate lack of justice is people who stay in prison for up to 5 years without even coming to trial. So there are lots of people in the prison system who have never actually been charged, and they've been there for 5 years. So if their father was somebody important, they would have had 10 lawyers coming there and getting them out after half an hour. The justice system is a whole other domain of inequity. That said, I think the question of power is not just that. It's at all levels. In the U.S. right now, Twitter was saying things that were Mr. Trump didn't like, so he got his friend Mr. Musk buy Twitter, and now it can be used for whatever, saying racist things as Mr. Trump likes. Money is enormous control over. I mean, we know that in India, the media is we need to fight to keep the media somewhat more independent than it's tending to be, because it's too easy to buy up media. It's too easy to have a completely very tame media everywhere, and that's not good for anybody. Not good for the country. Not even good for the people who are currently ruling the country. They need to know what's wrong, what's right, and we don't seem to be we're not exactly getting there.
Not just Elon Musk buying turning Twitter into X. Jeff Bezos bought Washington Post. In India, big corporates are buying media houses. Can you link how, information is power, we know. How can information, is there a correlation between information driving inequality?
I don't, I mean, clearly, at some level it is, in the sense that there is lots of evidence, for example, that and this goes back to the education question. There's a very nice study in the UK of kids who come from relatively lower middle class backgrounds and kids who come from more privileged backgrounds. And the lower middle class kids don't know where to apply for college. So if they have the same test score, they apply to inferior colleges and choose inferior colleges. The ones who are in the know, whose parents are well educated and well informed, end up doing better in life for a very simple reason. They don't have access to the basic information about what is a good thing to study now. They often go to the wrong place, they study the wrong thing. So I think information is power at every level.
Okay. Talking about, since you brought the topic back to education, see, now the buzzword is AI. We don't know what AI is exactly going to do. Is it a Frankenstein monster that we have let out and we have no idea whether it will come back and hit us? Do you think in future, with all these investments and talks about AI, would AI drive inequality even higher? Or can it act as an equalizer, as a leveler somehow? How do you see AI?
I'm not an expert. It really is one of the things that is, at this point, there's relatively little AI still being used, but where it is being used is displacing jobs. Now, there is always this claim that, at the beginning, technology always displaces jobs, and then eventually it creates new jobs. And the example people give is the Industrial Revolution. In the Industrial Revolution, mechanization first killed a lot of jobs. All the weavers and the spinners in England lost their jobs, and they went on a rampage. They started breaking mechanical looms. They were, these were called. There was what was called the Luddite movement, and they were breaking machines. Then eventually it gets reversed. Now the fact that people say that yes, maybe it's going to get reversed, the fact, I don't know whether it will get reversed. I'm not promising that. But what I can tell you is that the Industrial Revolution story is only half told. In the wages of the average worker start going down in 1760, when the Industrial Revolution starts. And the wages keep going down, going down, going down, going down, and they only resurface in 1825. So 65 years of wages being lower than what they were, and then they come back. So even if they come back, it's going to be, the Industrial Revolution example says it could take a while. It could be very painful in between.
And we talk about AI and education, healthcare. We've covered all of that, but we all understand that gender is also a very important factor, and women are impacted, women and children, when we talk about poverty. They take the the brunt of it. Is that also same for inequality when it comes to women and especially children, are they more impacted by inequality?
So I think that, I mean, right now, the kind of inequality that's, you can see, which is particularly vivid, I mean, in India is inequality at the very top. Um, at the bottom, if anything, while there is a lot of, I think, disputes about whether we should be do giveaways or reveries and this and that, most governments are actually doing a fair amount to to help the poor. In fact, we did some work many years ago showing that if you take somebody who's very poor, poorest of the poor, and you give them an asset like a cow. Okay, we did a randomized control trial. Randomly chosen 300 families got some assets and 300 more didn't. We followed them for 17 years. And 17 years later, the people who got the asset are 40% richer. So there is, and this program, which is called, the graduation program, because the idea is you graduate from ultra poverty to poverty, has now been taken up, for example, by the government of Bihar. It's implementing it for 100,000 families. So in fact, there is a lot of, I think, relatively positive work being done for the very poor all over India, and by state governments, also the national government. So I don't think, I think that there is an attempt to fight extreme poverty, which I think is probably will have, to the extent that we can see that the next generation, the people who benefited, whose mothers got the asset, are now more productive, they have better jobs, they have better businesses. So I do think that this one time, if we can make investments in these very poor families, that has positive effects on children. And that doesn't mean, the question is more, given the nature of the political discourse, there is so much resentment of this among the middle classes who say that, why should we give them giveaways? You hear like CEOs saying that my money gets taxed. I mean, not recognizing that every CEO relies on the entire infrastructure of the country, the fact that there is social peace and that there is working welfare system and all those things that make it possible for them to operate. I think that it's there's this very tempting thing. My tax money, what am I getting? You're getting the fact that you can work in this country. You're getting the fact that there's no social, we are not in where Pakistan is, where there is just violence everywhere. You're getting all those things, and you're getting a labor force that's willing to work for you. There is an incredible amount of, I think, I think, blindness to how a society is meant to function. So I think a lot of the discourses about inequality is, or those people, what are they doing for their living? I'm taking care of them. They're working hard. They're trying what they can. The society doesn't provide many opportunities. When people get opportunities, they do something with them. That's the evidence. And so I'm very deeply kind of, I guess I'm very, very concerned by this particular discourse, which we see everywhere.
Abhijit, I would love to hear your views on aid system, because whenever governments want to address inequality or to elevate inequality, they always talk in terms of aid, sending aid, the humanitarian aid. We have a whole global system to support that. And I think there is one school of thought which says aid works, and the other one saying that aid doesn't, because even recently, I think the United States cut aid for many global institutions from UN. They have pulled out. And Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, recently said if they want to help a government, they are going to send money directly to the government and not to the aid organizations. And they used a particular term called the self-perpetuating aid organizations, because they are also thriving. What is your view when it comes to this kind of aid system? Do you think poor people will fall through the gap if the transaction is between one government to another?
So, I think that three things on that. First thing, I would say that a lot of this discussion about, aid is a little bit overblown in the sense that if you think of most countries in the world, I'm not talking about India, I'm talking about Kenya, most of Kenya's social spending comes from the Kenyan government. Aid is a very small part of the story, except in a small number of countries. Where it is very important and where I think aid is, the cutting of aid might lead to a lot of people dying, are in places which are in the middle of civil war where there is a famine. So think of Somalia, think of Sudan, think of South Sudan. This is where aid can be very useful because the entire social fabric has collapsed. And in the middle of that, aid, the US Bureau of Humanitarian Affairs was the biggest funder of, supporting programs of this kind. So I think Rubio is wrong on every detail of that. I think the one place where aid is important is precisely not giving it to the most important place is probably not giving it to governments, but to give it to people who can operate in a place where there is no government, like in Sudan. So I think that that's backwards. I also think that where aid has been very useful always has been in encouraging people to experiment. This is a bit self-serving. We do experiments often with, USAID or other funding, and or most importantly with funding from the British aid agency, and those experiments basically show new ideas. Those new ideas then spread. So one of the things that they do again is not so much funding governments as funding research, funding NGOs, funding original, innovative actions. And in all of this, I think Rubio gets it exactly backwards.
Then, we also have welfare states. And Kerala is a great example. We have subsidies, pensions, a lot of schemes that help poor people. And recently, we have eradicated extreme poverty. And we are also, I think, a great national model that people always point out. Kerala has this great welfare model. What is the relevance of welfare states in addressing inequality? And has this worked in any other places?
I think, again, let's go back to this distinction we discussed at the beginning. I think a huge part of addressing inequality is really taxing the rich. That's what we don't talk about. We really need to change the way we deal with the rich. And we don't tax the rich. Wealth accumulation is extraordinarily fast and extraordinary concentration among the rich. And that's something we're doing nothing about. Then the welfare state is really addresses, if it addresses anything, it addresses poverty, not inequality. It's only at the bottom that, the rich, in fact, it's funded. A lot of the welfare state is funded by, by GST, by what everybody buys. So it's not a hugely redistributive thing. But for the very poor, it provides some support. And I think the evidence is very much that it for a class of people who would otherwise not have anything, it provides something. I think the evidence from NREGA is very, very much that, which is that it improves the quality of life of people who are at the bottom of the income distribution. So, I mean, to that extent, the welfare state is doing what it's supposed to do, which is to keep people out of poverty. It's not supposed to do anything about inequality, and it doesn't.
I've read somewhere that we Indians are notorious for not paying taxes. I mean, there's a major segment of our society, people who don't pay or who haven't paid a single penny as a tax. How do you think we can improve this taxation system? Are there good models that India can follow? Because you said addressing taxation is one efficient way of addressing tax inequality?
I think first of all, I mean, we were, part of it is, I mean, as Warren Buffett famously said, he pays less taxes than, I think he said, his accountant or somebody. And the reason is that the tax systems are created with huge loopholes for the rich, because in some sense, we have a inbuilt great faith that the rich are somehow very important. And I think unless we disabuse ourselves of, the rich could be important, but think about the fact that the most successful years of Western capitalism were between 1945 and 1975. Taxes on income are between 70% and 90%. Eisenhower sets marginal tax rates up to 90% at some point. And these are the most successful years of Western capitalism. It's when Western capitalism starts to founder in the late 80s, late 70s, that suddenly people discover it's very important to have tax cuts. So under Reagan, you get this massive tax cuts. Reagan starts with 70% marginal tax rates, that's the tax rates on the most richest, and cuts them to 35%. And since then, we've never managed to raise tax rates on the very rich. And I think that there was never any particular evidence that this works. It just, the rich got this tax break. They got even richer. They created lobbying organizations that prevented taxes being raised. And we haven't managed to raise taxes. So I think it's mostly self-perpetuating. I don't think there is any particular logic for not taxing the rich.
As you said, the rich is getting richer, and there are these tax havens which are particularly designed for these ultra-rich people to park their money. And you have been campaigning to get these tax havens banned. Do you see any progress? Are there at least debates and conversations
something interesting happened. This Mauritius, the court judgment that basically blocks the tax-free status of Mauritius-based investments, that's an interesting one. And they should just generalize that to the rest of the world. I think that's one of the things that is really, it's a 2 weeks ago Supreme Court judgment saying that, you can't route your money through Mauritius and avoid taxes. I think that's a general class of actions we need to take, and I congratulate the Supreme Court for having taken that.
Thank you. And when you talk about addressing these tax havens, at the same time, you have spoken about models of how certain countries have successfully flattened inequality, and they're not necessarily democracies, they're not necessarily Western countries. So could you tell us a little bit about, which are these countries that have successfully done it, and what have they got it right? And what can we learn from them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a bunch of Latin American countries, actually that particular period from 2000 to 2015, a lot of Latin American countries expand their welfare system, but they actually do it by taxing the rich. And as a result, I don't think it's anything particularly mysterious. They taxed the rich and started subsidizing the poor, and through these what are called conditional cash transfer programs, and they spread like wildfire through the Latin America, and that's, I think, why it happened.
Inequality permeates every aspect of our life. Sitting here, I can see that, we have a huge fan blowing cold wind on us, and, you have to use your paper fans. We have now another 10, 11 minutes for questions from the audience. I'm sure there's a lot that you want to directly ask Mr. Banerjee. Can you please tell your name and ask a quick question, please?
Good evening, sir. I am Fatima of 7th Standard from KET. My question is that if you are able to send a message to the future, how would you like to send it, and what would the message be?
Sorry.
Sending a message to who?
To the future. What would you send the message?
If you can send a message to future.
I think that's a great question. And I would say that, I'm sorry, we're not taking a great care of the world we are leaving you. I would apologize.
That's a great answer too.
Hi, sir. My name is Aisha, and it's my pleasure to meet you. Being an economics graduate myself, I have a small question for you. So, yes, the government is doing a lot for poverty alleviation programs and everything, but do you think that development is sort of confined to infrastructure building? I'm not saying that it's not necessary, but from what I have observed, even when it's the state government or the central government, the major agenda about development comes up, when there are more buildings or when people can see those buildings or there are billboards. So what's your take on that?
I think that there is. I think that my sense is that if you look at the data, we actually studied this. People care about infrastructure, but not necessarily the same infrastructure as the government. The government likes building roads, highways, bridges. People like drainage, better drainage, less water logging in the neighborhoods, less smelly neighborhoods, more running water. So these are both infrastructure. I think the question is which infrastructure?
Good evening, sir. What is the biggest economic risk AI poses to the next generation?
What is the biggest economic risk
I
AI?
think climate change. Climate change is by far someone in India, I think the climate change is, so it's going to be, unless we do something about it, it's going to be so big, and we meaning India, but also the rest of the world do so, but India is also a big player in that. It's going to be so big and so devastating. I think there is data showing that basically if you work outside when it's 40 degrees and you go home and it's still 40 degrees or 45 degrees, it shortens your life by 7-8 years. So it would be the number of days where the average temperature is going to be above 35 degrees, average meaning night and day total, is going to grow hugely over the next century unless we cut down on emissions. And I think that's going to kill a lot of people and make a lot of other people very sick. I think that's the biggest by far.
Abhijit, he also asked about what is the biggest challenge AI will pose.
Or AI. Right? So I think AI is, it's the part that I don't feel comfortable answering because I suspect that the obvious is that it's going to take away a lot of the middle skill jobs. I think that's relatively well understood. What we don't know is what jobs it will create. And that's the part that's what I said, that when the first thing that's going to happen is a lot of middle skill jobs will be lost. A lot of wages in that part of sectors will be, there won't be jobs, the wages will fall. And we already see that happening, actually. What's going to happen, maybe in the long run, something else will happen. But we really are in no position to judge right now.
Hi, sir. My name is Hari. So I want to know, can we be optimistic in a future where AI is controlled in a capitalistic society? So you told about billionaires and how they are controlling the power. So I am really worried about a future where we are concentrated on how we can make more profit. So how can we be optimistic in a future where AI is controlled in a capitalistic model of economy?
AI is not going to control. I mean, I think there is this whole thing of AI controlling things. I think we are going to control things. Question is, and with AI especially, I think the control of AI is going to be critical. So I think capitalists will control AI. I sure don't control capitalism.
Good evening, sir. Okay, lately we have certain AIs called Grok, etc., that really exploit the humankind economically, academically, information, or even sexually at this point. And these platforms are run by really, really huge, big conglomerates that are at this point untouchable. So if you could break it down into simple words, how can we oppose this except for... So the point is, no one's gonna really stop using it, quote unquote, because if it's so easy to exploit people, then people are not gonna stop using it. So how do you oppress or how do you go against this huge conglomerates who exploit normal humankind?
It's an excellent question. I wish I had an answer for you, but I don't like to claim that I know something that I don't. I have no idea. It's frightening. I agree.
Hi, sir. So my question was about the tax loopholes that you talked about. You talked about the tax loopholes and a recent court ruling about Mauritius. Yeah. So is there ever a world where tax havens such as Ireland or Dubai don't become the primary go-to targets for huge corporations as well as for personal profits or personal fortunes? Is there ever a world where such tax havens do not exist anymore?
Yeah, I don't think it's that hard actually. I think there was even before this whole Trump episode took all our attention. There was a lot of agreement of putting a 15% minimum on all corporations, and I still think that's going to happen. That essentially wherever you are, you can claim you are in Ireland, but you'll still have to pay 15% on all revenues. So I do think that that's going to eventually happen. I mean, Trump is going to make that harder, but I think it will eventually happen.
So my question is regarding development economics. So your data economics and policies, I've also done your MIT's data economics and policy, which
Course.
is there.
Yes.
But my question is, even in your RCT trials and everything, there's always a focus on policies. So what is generally covered in development economics?
Okay, let me just answer that. So what's covered in development economics? I think this, I think a lot of it is about, what causes...
I could ask the question. So what I want to ask is, isn't there a gap that in the macroeconomic...
There is, we teach our students macroeconomics. In fact, I'm teaching right now, and as soon as I go back, I'll teach a course which is called Development Economics, Macro Issues. So it's not that there is any, all of these things are part of the narrative.
Hi sir, good evening. Myself Huda Majid. So the Kerala government has recently completed a program which is EPIP, Extreme Poverty Eradication Program. My question is, taking Indian condition right now, do you really think we can completely eradicate poverty within a few years?
If we want to put extreme poverty, we are not that far from being able to do it. If we have the political will to do it, we can do it. I think
Guys, thank you so much for these wonderful questions and also being a great audience.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abhijit, for being here. It's an absolute pleasure to host you and to hear
Thank you,
from you.
Anjana.